IAM seeks to build bridges of understanding between the Asian Indians and the society at large within the state of Minnesota and the country. It connects us with India through events that promote cultural understanding and also provides a charitable hand to causes here as well as in India, all the while functioning as an umbrella organization for many regional Asian Indian organizations in our state. In summer of 2020, South Asians Against Racial Injustices, SAARI, organized a vigil. So this South Asians Against Racial Injustice, which is called SAARI, is an initiative that was started by India Association of Minnesota in collaboration with regional partner organizations as well as the community members. And on Thursday, June 6th, we carried out a silent vigil in honor of George Floyd in order to express our solidarity with the Black community and to pledge our engagement in breaking the cycle of prejudice and discrimination. Throughout month of July 2020, IAM SAARI organized along with other organizations a speaker series in order to help us understand the racial injustice. All these programs were recorded and can be found on IAM website under the tab Racial Justice. This year, we continue with our SAARI initiative and we extend it to BIPOC, that is Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And we will continue to focus on work related to racial justice, especially focusing on self-reflection and intentionality to first work on self-education of the South Asian community about BIPOC issues. One of the goals of SAARI is to promote awareness and education of the Asian Indian community about Black history and what role we Asian Indians can play when we offer our solidarity and allyship with the Black community. It is a long journey, but we have to start somewhere. So today we are kickstarting our events this year with today's event, where we are going to learn more about Black history in Minnesota from our local civil rights leader. And as we all know that Black history is important because Black history is American history. As first generation immigrants like us, who now call Minnesota home, how much history do we really know about the country we live in, we work in, and raise our kids in? And even if we learned history in history books and movies, did we learn the local history? What is the Black history of the town that we live in? Until we understand that, we will not understand the race issues of racism and discrimination issues in Minnesota. So to put a light on this topic, we have invited our esteemed speaker, Deb Montgomery. Welcome, Deb.
Thank you.
And now I invite our IAM board member, Shanti Shah, to introduce Deb to us.
Deborah Montgomery is Minnesota's civil rights leader who led NAACP at a very early age. She participated in two historical civil rights marches that we all have learned over the years, along with Dr. King in the 1960s. She was the first woman police officer of St. Paul and first African female member of St. Paul City Council. She has 20 years of experience in law enforcement as senior commander and 23 years of law enforcement instructor. Please welcome Deborah Montgomery. Thank you, Deborah, for joining us.
Well, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Just so we know, they wanted me to start with some history of growing up in Minnesota. And so I'm a product of the Rondo neighborhood that you probably read about all the time. It was the Black or the African-American neighborhood that was, and we were redlined. So if you could go to the History Center and get a picture of the old map back in the 40s and 50s of the city of St. Paul, you would see that the area where Old Rondo was was redlined. And we went, you couldn't go north of University, you couldn't go south of Marshall, you couldn't go west of Lexington, all the way down to the flats. And so that was the Rondo neighborhood. And in 1956, the Federal Highway Department came through and decimated the Rondo community. And they took over 600 houses and over 300 businesses. We had our own community. As I talk about it all the time, we had a village. Everybody knew everybody, everybody respected everybody. And so you couldn't do anything wrong. If you were a young person and you're walking down the street and you were acting up, so to speak, one of the elders would say, whose family do you belong to? And then you'd tell them, and they'd say, well, you know, that behavior isn't acceptable and you should know better. And we'd get scolded by them. But by the time we got home, the drumbeat, the phone call had been made, and we got it again. So it just shows you what a knit community was. So while I was doing that, at the age of 13, I was very involved with the NAACP. And just so you guys know, there's a 4-hour segment that just went on this past week on the Black churches. The Black church was very important in our community. And I grew up in St. Philip's Episcopal Church, and Father Denzel Carty, who was very active in the civil rights movement, he was the one that got me interested in it through church. And at the age of 13, I became the president of the St. Paul NAACP youth group. And that was he had identified me as a potential leader. And then if you talk to the young people that grew up with me, they said, you made us get our money, our 10 cents and our 15 cents together, so we have to buy a membership. But we got them to get a membership. And then I delegated, and it was interesting when I look in hindsight, I would delegate back to the members, the young people, and give them tasks. Okay, your task for our meeting, and we'd meet maybe once a month or once every 2 weeks, depending on what the situation was. It's your task to go find a location for us to meet. And with young people, you always have to feed them. So somebody would have to figure out where we're going to get food to feed them while they're at the meeting. And then we would strategize on what things we could do within the community. So that was my beginning in the NAACP. From there, at the age of 17, I had been going to the NAACP national conventions with Miss Allie Mae Hampton. She was the advisor for the NAACP youth group here. And I became very active at the national level with the youth group. And so Andre McKissick, who was Floyd McKissick's daughter out of North Carolina, and Aaron Henry Jr., who was the son of Aaron Henry Sr. out of Mississippi, it kind of gave me exposure to the South, being a Northern person. And so I got to learn a lot through the connections there. I got elected. The young people decided when I was 17, that I should run for the board of directors. And there was a college, when I say a college position, you had different historically Black colleges would have somebody that would always be put up. Well, I ended up winning the election when I was 17. So I was the youngest member ever elected to the National Board of Directors. So I was able to sit at the National Board. It was held out in New York. That's where the headquarters was. I was able to sit out on the National Board with Roy Wilkins, Carl Rowan, Thurgood Marshall, who was our attorney at that time. And to get to hear those discussions was really powerful to hear what was going on at a broader level and then bring that back to our local branch and to our students. So that was one of the opportunities I had, and I was very blessed to have that opportunity.
Yeah, so being a woman, being an African-American woman, and at a young age, doing all these things, it's really commendable. I have a small clip here, which was shown on this MLK Day on 19th January 2021 on Fox News. And this little clip really captures all the work that you did as a young woman. So let's look at that clip.
Paul honoring Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. They began at Central High School, ending at the state capitol. Those participating today hoping to use today to reflect on how we can all put an end to racism in America.
A St. Paul woman who took part in 2 of Dr. King's most historic marches says that MLK Day is very close to her heart.
Debbie Montgomery was the first woman to become a St. Paul police officer and the first African-American woman elected to the St. Paul City Council.
Our Maury Glover spoke with her about how we can all pay tribute to the civil rights icon on his holiday.
It's just a trying time. We're a society that's actually trying to find our way again.
For Debbie Montgomery, a day to celebrate one of the nation's most well-known civil rights leaders is also a time to look back and look ahead.
I think the goal of what MLK Day is about is more relevant this year than before, with all the things that are going on.
As a young woman, Montgomery traveled across the country to hear Dr. Martin Luther King's most famous speech during the March on Washington.
I have a dream.
I was very moved and very inspired. I was blessed to have that opportunity.
And to take part in the marches from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, which eventually helped lead to the passing of the Voting Rights Act.
We had the KKK guys with their hoods and their guns and hollering slurs and negative things to us, which I hadn't experienced up here.
But she says it's disappointing to see the issues the civil rights movement fought for in the 60s and 70s, like equal access to education, housing, and employment, are still being fought for today.
I just don't know that we've come a long way. I mean, you see some incremental changes.
Montgomery says while there have been advances in race relations, like the first black president and the soon-to-be first black female vice president, the death of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police and the resurgence of white supremacy show our country still has a long way to go.
Racism is alive and well. You know, I mean, we got to be honest about it. Systemic racism is here. We have to address it.
Montgomery says the number of young people who've become engaged in the fight for racial equality is an encouraging sign of better days ahead. And maybe one day Dr. King's iconic words,
Free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last,
will finally come true.
We need to get past the dream and make reality come. Stand up, speak up, show up, and carry a message of hope and justice and love.
Maury Glover, Fox 9 News.
Wow, that is really powerful. I think that gives everybody some idea as to the level of work that you did at that time. And it's really inspiring to hear your words saying this is reality. And, you know, to make that dream a reality, we have a lot of work to do still. So being the first female police officer in the St. Paul Police Force, can you tell us a little bit about that experience? How was that?
It was not, at the time, I was the administrative assistant to Mayor Larry Cohen. So I had a master's degree and I was working in the planning department and the grants department. And so then Ron Jones, who was the EEO officer of the city of St. Paul, approached me because I was a jock in my younger days. And he said, Debbie, I need you to take this test because Miles Lord, the attorney general at the time, and the NAACP filed a lawsuit and said that there were only 4 African Americans on the St. Paul Police Department out of 600 officers, and 6% of the population was African American, and so that they filed a suit saying that they needed more African American officers. Ron said not only did they need more African American officers, they don't have any women, and you're the only woman I know that can pass the test, he thought, because it was the West Point Military Physical Agility Test, which was very rigorous. So for 50 jobs, they didn't hire from 1971 to 1974. The police department didn't hire because they weren't going to be told who they had to hire. And in 1974, it became a life safety issue. So they posted for 50 jobs. 2,000 people signed up, 250 women. And I was the only woman that passed, and only 8 men did better than I did on the total test. It was a psychological, a physical agility background. It was pretty intensive, 6 different parts. So anyway, there's a letter in my file that says, thank you for the opportunity to take the test, but no, I don't want the job, because it was a $10,000 cut in pay because I had a master's degree and all you needed was a GED to be a police officer. And so anyway, the Friday before the academy started, one of the African-American men dropped out. The mayor asked me, because I was the only one on the list that he had control of since I was already a city employee, to sit in and get the academy started. So I sat in. I didn't want to do it, but I did it. And so that was on a Friday. And on a Saturday, they're taking me down to Uniforms Unlimited and trying to fit me into a man's uniform, because the average height at that time for the police officer was 6 feet, and I was 5'6" 3/4. So they're cutting my uniform down and putting pieces in from my backside and men's shoes, and it was a zoo. I looked like Clarabelle the Clown when they got me dressed. But anyway, I get to the academy the first day, and some of my classmates were there, and they were actually calling us niggers and out of our name. You know, it was kind of interesting experience. And so anyway, that's 1974. I physically had to share a locker room with 21 men. They didn't have a women's locker room. We had PT every day. So I'd have to go to PT. They were showing us defensive tactic moves and takedown moves. But I was blessed. The first person that took any interest in me was the PT instructor, because he saw I was having problems they were showing us how to do takedowns of people over the upper body. And he saw I was struggling. And he was wise enough to figure out that women's strength is in our lower bodies. And so he was showing me how to take people down using my lower body. So it was kind of interesting. I couldn't shoot the gun. I never had seen a gun. And so that was my second part of the problem. But anyway, I went through that. I was there for 2 weeks. I was ready to go back. The mayor calls, says, Debbie, can you stay 2 more weeks? Miles Lord might think something's up. I'm at the top of my academy. I'm tutoring the African-American men at night after I'd come home. I had 4 kids at the time. My youngest was 2.5. So I'd come home, help get them organized. And then after I did our homework, I'd go and I'd meet up with the African-American men and I'd say, okay, I believe these are going to be the 4 questions on the law exam. And usually I was pretty close. I got most of the time I had the 4 questions that were going to be asked. So I get them targeted in on that. But so that was just some of the stuff. But at the end of a month, I thought I didn't want this job. But we didn't get to have bullets in our gun, and we didn't get to drive the squad car with the red lights. So I wanted to try that. So I wanted to do the field training. So I went in and did that. And that was a whole nother story, because at that time they had bench seats. I'm 5'6" 3/4. The men are 6 feet. So when I pulled the seat up, the guy that's sitting in the passenger seat, the senior officer says, no, you are not driving. And I ended up having to go over to the passenger side. And the passenger side is the writer. You're taking the reports. The city attorneys loved me because I could write complete sentences and I could spell. So that they loved that part of the fact that I could write excellent police reports, the who, what, where, when, why, and how. And so anyway, after that, I was ready to go back to my job in the mayor's office. There was an election. There was a new mayor. My position was there, but it wasn't funded. So that's how I ended up on the police department. It's interesting because it was very eye-opening to see how that whole thing operated. And it was interesting because I'm a people person, and to sit and to deal with the public, they put me in a one-person squad car on Rice Street, which is the highest crime area in the city at that time. And I wasn't getting backup. They would send me to these calls waiting for it to see if I would get beat up. One of the things they found out through this experience, they didn't know it was going to happen, is that women are very communicative. And so I wasn't going to go in, slam, bam, thank you, ma'am. Say, listen, let's sit down, let's talk about it, let's figure this out. And so that was kind of an interesting dynamic that in hindsight, when I listened to some of the senior officers later that they found out about. But it was interesting to deal with. I had the Hell's Outcast headquarters over on Rice Street. So I had to deal with the bikers and the barroom fights and stuff like that. I have 2 bionic knees for all the barroom fights I was in. They were throwing me around like a rag doll. I was all of 127 pounds. And so that, that was some of the stuff that went on. But because of the background I had the connections to know how the city worked. And I also was connected to the nonprofit community. So if I made a traffic stop, and most of the people over there were poor whites or low-income whites, and they'd have a headlight out or a tail light out, and I'd say, well, did you know your light's out? And they, yes or no, whatever. And well, do you have any money to get it fixed? Because this is at that time, a $25 tag or something like that. And they'd say, well, I get my check on the 1st or the 3rd or whenever they got it. And I said, well, can you get it fixed and that with your check at that time? And they would tell me yes or no when they could get it fixed. Well, I took it upon myself to go over to Menards and get some red reflective tape. And I'd say to them, if I trusted them, if I thought that their heart, that they were telling me the truth, and I was a pretty good judge of character, I'd say, here, I can't do it, but if you put this red tape over, it'll keep anybody else from stopping you. And so that's when I talk about police work. We're public servants, we're the only group of people out 24/7. And it's how do you make people that are in distress, even on a traffic stop, how can you help them try to navigate this? And then on my day off, one time I went up to the Rice Street Businessmen's Association, introduced myself, I got on their agenda, and I said, these are the things that I see with your residents and your customers. And if you guys could get a pot of money or some coupons down to the guy on Maryland and Rice gas station, I can give them out coupons and put a date when they say they can pay them, and they can go get the headlight fixed or the tail light fixed so they don't get a ticket. I mean, you just keep getting tickets, and then they go into warrants, and then you got them in jail, and then you're impacting the family. So that was a whole bigger system going on. So anyway, long story short, the little things that I was doing, and because I was working by myself, nobody could tell me I couldn't do it. And only one person out of the whole time I did that didn't do what they said they were going to do. And I actually went back and talked to them to say, the only thing you can give somebody is your word. And, I don't have a lot of trust in it. I hope you can work on that. But it was that motherly feeling, or that, how do you engage with the public kind of feeling? So that just gives you a little trial on how I did police work. I also, it was interesting. I didn't get my first pay raise on the department after 6 months because I was told that I didn't write enough tags. And I said, oh, is there a quota? To which I did not get a response. But as I was leaving, the sergeant at the door said, Debbie, an apple a day will keep the doctor away. In other words, if you do a tag a day, you might be okay, you know. So it's things like that, little things that, you know, kind of navigate you through this that we have to work on. And, you know, it was a learning experience. It was good. As I say, I progressed through. I became a supervisor, a street supervisor, a lieutenant over investigations, a commander over the juvenile unit. Kids were my passion, so it was a great place for me. And then I became a senior commander, the watch commander that's the acting chief at night when the chief is not there. So after 28 years, I retired from there. My community asked me to run for the city council. I ran on jobs, economic development, and opportunities for youth and seniors. And that was my main goal. For 4 years that I was on there, I created 1,350 new jobs in our ward. I got $109 million in new investment into Ward 1. I got Jimmy Lee Rec Center opened and got the Minnesota Vikings to turf the football field. So, I mean, it was just, I mean, I'm a connector. So I've got a lot of networks, and I kind of work with people to try to accomplish where I see a problem and how can we resolve it. Tom Carrico, who was the real estate guy for the Midway Target, my green people, if you notice, if you've been up this way, we have the only super Target that doesn't have a sea of blacktop. It's got trees, it's got benches. My green people said, we need trees. We need benches. My bike people said they needed bicycle racks, although I don't see them full all the time. But anyway, we got more bicycle racks. But the other piece was I asked them only hire from Ward 1 residents because our folks needed jobs. And the 300 new jobs that they brought in all came from Ward 1. And they had a trailer in the back of the store when they were opening up. And they had to have interpreters because right next door to the super Target is 1247 St. Anthony. And we had a large Somali population. We had a Hmong population. That's why I had talked to the 18 clan leaders and the 13 tribe leaders to make sure that their people would come down and interview for a job. So when I cut the ribbon for the opening, it looked like the United Nations standing there. I was so proud of what Target had done. So, I mean, it's working with people and trying to get them to understand what the problems are. And then how can you get them to buy into, you can make a contribution, stepping up to the plate with the resources that you have. And so I was blessed to be able to get that done while I was on the job. I got 50 units of senior housing. Our seniors said they needed senior housing because our church in our community is very important. And a lot of our seniors they couldn't take care of their homes. That was the other thing. Back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, mainly 50s and 60s, 70s, 80% plus of the African Americans were home ownership. And I don't know if you just saw in the news the other day, the city of St. Paul has become a renter city, and only 15%, and that's citywide, are home ownership. So that's where your wealth is in your house. And when they came through and took these 600 plus houses out of here, my mother, our house, she had a 4-bedroom house and 3 city lots. And in 1956, through eminent domain, they gave her $3,000 and told us to go find some place to live. And if you track the African-American community in St. Paul, you just have to track the Jewish community because those were the ones that would sell houses to us. And if you've also studied or heard, most of these houses that were out there had covenants in them. In fact, the house that we live in, and I've been here for 55 years, this house was moved from the old Maxfield site to where we are now. And it has a covenant in it in our deed that says this house is not to be sold to a non-white. So it's all these underlying things that are going on that have held the African Americans back. As I tell people when I'm talking to them, the African American community is the only group of people that I call the uninvited guest. The immigrants got here and they're invited, we weren't invited. We got pulled here. So we're the uninvited guests that have been abused for the time that we've been here.
So true. So true. Yeah. Deb, it's really amazing the way you described the work that you did as a female police officer. I really wish we had more of those right now. And, the empathy that you showed to the people that, you're working with in the city, and the extent to which you went out of your way to make sure that if they're not able to pay the ticket, how you can help them. I really wish that people like you train our current police force. And I know you have been an educator with the law enforcement for 23 years. So we really need more of that in the current situation. And also the work that you did with the city of St. Paul. I think that's much needed right now. We need that United Nations here in every city. So before we go ahead, I would like to play a little clip from interview with Dr. Martin Luther King that was done on NBC in 1967, and this was just 11 months before he was assassinated. And in that, he talks about the work that he had done until 1967, and he talks about what the future of civil rights movement will look like or should look like. And it's a very candid interview. So let's look at a few minutes of that, and then maybe we can talk more. So.
To grapple with them. Was there something hypocritical about the fact that the South existed and the North could point the finger? And then when the Civil Rights Acts were passed in the early 60s, you couldn't point the finger anymore?
Well, there was no doubt about the hypocrisy of large segments of the nation on the whole question of racial equality. I think the best example is that many of the senators from the North and the West, and congressmen generally, who voted for civil rights legislation in 64 and even 65 with the Voting Rights Bill, refused last year to vote for civil rights legislation because it dealt with an issue applicable to the North, the whole housing question. And this, it seems to me, was the greatest expression of the hypocrisy of many of our citizens and many of the senators and congressmen of the North.
But isn't that part of the dilemma now? That people knew that Negroes were being denied what was guaranteed to them by the Constitution, by the fact that they were citizens of this country. Then when they were given those rights, do you feel the white community said, well, we've given them all that we have, now it's up to them?
Well, I think the dilemma is much deeper, and I think one during this period of transition has to be very honest with America. And honesty impels me to admit that America has broad racist elements still alive. Racism is still existing in American society in many areas of the society, North and South. And the other thing is that there has never been a single, solid, determined commitment of large segments of white America on the whole question of racial equality. I think we have to see that vacillation has always existed, ambivalence has always existed, and this to me is the so-called white backlash. It's merely a new name for an old phenomenon. I see the white backlash as a continuation of the same ambivalence and vacillation of white America on the whole question of racial justice that has existed since the founding of our nation. I think the other thing that we must see at this time is that many of the people who supported us in Selma, in Birmingham, were really outraged about the extremist behavior toward Negroes. But they were not at that moment, and they are not now, committed to genuine equality for Negroes. It's much easier to integrate a lunch counter than it is to guarantee an annual income, for instance, to get rid of poverty for Negroes and all poor people. It's much easier to integrate a bus than it is to make genuine integration a reality and quality education a reality in our schools. It's much easier to integrate even a public park than it is to get rid of slums. And I think we are in a new era, a new phase of the struggle, where we have moved from a struggle for decency, which characterized our struggle for 10 or 12 years, to a struggle for genuine equality. And this is where we are getting the resistance, because there was never any intention to go this far. People were reacting to Bull Connor and to Jim Clark rather than acting in good faith for the realization of genuine equality.
Do you think white people in this country, and I'm talking about non-segregationists, people devoid or thinking they're devoid of racism, do you have any idea of what they want the Negro to be in America?
Well, it depends on the level that we are talking here, because I think you have to make a distinction between the people who are genuinely and absolutely committed in the white community on the question of racial equality. And I must confess that I think they're in a very small minority. I think the vast majority of white Americans will go but so far. It's a kind of installment plan for equality. And they are always looking for an excuse to go but so far.
Why are they looking for the excuse? What is it about the Negro? I mean, every other group that came as an immigrant somehow, not easily, but somehow got around it. Is it just the fact that Negroes are black?
That's a part of it, and that grows out of something else. You can't thingify anything without depersonalizing that something. If you use something as a means to an end, at that moment, you make it a thing, and you depersonalize it. The fact is that the Negro was a slave in this country for 244 years. That was a willful thing that was done. The Negro was brought here and changed, treated in very inhuman fashion. And this led to the thingification of the Negro. So he was not looked upon as a person. He was not looked upon as a human being with the same status and worth as other human beings. And the other thing is that human beings cannot continue to do wrong without eventually rationalizing that wrong. So slavery was justified morally, biologically, theoretically, scientifically, everything else. And it seems to me that white America must see that no other ethnic group has been a slave on American soil. That is one thing that other immigrant groups haven't had to face. The other thing is that the color became a stigma. American society made the Negro's color a stigma, and that can never be overlooked. So I think these things are absolutely necessary. The other thing is that America freed the slaves in 1863 through the Emancipation Proclamation of Abraham Lincoln, but gave the slaves no land or nothing in reality, and as a matter of fact, to get started on. At the same time, America was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that there was a willingness to give the white peasants from Europe an economic base. And yet it refused to give its black peasants from Africa, who came here involuntarily in chains and had worked free for 244 years, any kind of economic base. And so emancipation for the Negro was really freedom to hunger. It was freedom to the winds and rains of heaven. It was freedom without food to eat or land to cultivate, and therefore it was freedom and famine at the same time. And when white Americans tell the Negro to lift himself by his own bootstraps, they don't look over the legacy of slavery and segregation. I believe we ought to do all we can and seek to lift ourselves by our own bootstraps. But It's a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And many Negroes, by the thousands and millions, have been left bootless as a result of all of these years of oppression and as a result of a society that deliberately made his color a stigma and something worthless and degrading.
Apart from wanting to live better, which all of us want to do, to raise one's children in a better way, to be better, does the Negro in America know what he wants to be?
I'm convinced that almost every Negro in this country, other than those who have been so scarred by the system that they've become pathological in the process, and we all have to battle with pathology, and nobody really knows what it means to be a Negro unless one can really experience it. And I know we all have to battle with this constant drain of a feeling of nobodiness. But in spite of this, I think the vast majority of Negroes in this country know that they want to be people, they want to be men, they want equality, period. It just boils down to that. And we haven't been able to be people. We haven't been men because of all of the conditions that we've lived with and the syndrome of deprivation surrounding conditions, whether it's in housing, in the economic area, or in schools, or in the vicious credit practices that we face in the ghetto, and all of the problems of closed doors and constant defeats. But in spite of all this, I think we all know, basically, that we want to be men. We want to be persons judged not on the basis of the color of our skin, but on the basis of the content of our character.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack in that little clip. So I don't know if anybody had seen this before, but I have seen it a few times, and every time I get something new out of it. So he talks about the hypocrisy that was present, the white backlash, and so many other issues. And this was 1967. And I'm sure you will agree that it still holds true today in 2021. He talks about how easy it is to do token changes rather than making structural changes to achieve, he calls it genuine equality. The thingification of Black Americans, and that he has explained really well. Also very interesting in this clip is he talks about how African American as a group are different from other immigrants and minorities, whether it is the color of their skin and stigma associated with Blackness, or the history of slavery that was not shared by other immigrant groups, and so many other factors. In your talks, you also mentioned, Deb, that we haven't really come a long way. And after seeing this clip, we see that that's so true. Can you help us understand how should we take his words today, especially in Minnesota? If you could talk to that. And I saw you nodding your head a few times. So what were you thinking as you were seeing this clip?
You know, it's real interesting. That was 1967. And I had just spoken to a different group, and they asked me who would be three people I'd like to sit down and have lunch with. And one of them was Harriet Tubman. And one of the quotes that she said, and it ties into just what he was saying in 67, and this is Harriet Tubman back in the 1800s. Most of those coming from the mainland were very destitute, almost naked. I'm trying to find places for those to work and provide for them as best I can, so as to lighten the burden on the government as much as possible, while at the same time they learn to respect themselves by owning their own living. And that's what it's about. We just want to be able to be a part and to take care of ourselves and to be productive citizens. And, you know, you think back to the 1800s, here's 1967, here's 2021. we just haven't got there yet. And I don't know, because there is systemic racism, and for all those people that don't believe it, there is. The criminal justice system is one example. The jails are full up here in Minnesota with Black men for marijuana. Now they're trying to make marijuana legal, and halfway across the United States, in other states, it's illegal. And so what are we going to do to get them out? They're supposed to be, I'm trying to get people to vote. They took away if you went to jail and you were in jail and you were on paper, you couldn't vote. How do you become a part of a society when you can't vote for your leaders? I mean, it's just, you can just go right down the medical profession. They want to know why there's a concern about poor people and African-American, it showed on being able to get the shot. But, there's a lot of resistance to not knowing whether we can trust the medical profession. It's just the systemic racism just keeps running through, and the different laws, they break up your family. If the man, just an example, if the man goes to prison and now the mother's trying to take care of the kids, then they get on food stamps. So then you're restricted by the government again on what you can do and can't do and what you can buy and can't buy. I mean, people, we just want to live. We want to be whole. We want to be able to make decisions for ourselves. We want to be able to contribute to society. And that's what I heard Dr. King saying there. And that's the stuff that, I hear in the community all the time. One of the things I think is really important, ever since we lost in this state, the city, the Rondo neighborhood, the African-American community is the only community that does not have an economic engine. This is a capitalist society. You cannot exist without an economic engine. And that was one of the things I was trying to build when I was on the city council, was trying to build businesses and try to get folks in the job. I talked to the 18 clan, the Yangs support the Yangs, the Bangs support the Bangs, the Lees support the Lees, the 13 Somali tribe leaders, the tribe supports each other. The 6 Oromo leaders that I speak with, each one supports each other. It just, you guys, those groups come with a culture and a custom where they support, where through the African Americans, as my grandmother used to always say, I always like her saying, we're like a bucket of crabs. If one of us gets to the top, there's somebody pulling us back down. And I keep trying to tell our young people, we have to work on that. And earlier, one of the questions that somebody brought up, I do teach. I've been teaching for over 25 years in law enforcement. And it's always been a part of my class. I teach it. Well, I've taught the whole program, but lately I've been teaching ethics theory and service learning. I had the only class in the state that required my students to volunteer with a culture different than themselves. And they had to orally and in writing be able to tell me, how did you build relationships, handle conflict, use mediation, all of which we got to do in our job. And I tell you, my young, classic example, one of my students lately said, I sent him over to the Boys and Girls Club in North Minneapolis. And he says, well, I was the only white person there. I said, how'd you feel? I grew up in Minnesota. There ain't a lot of us neither, So he says, well, they swear a lot. I said, that's a communication issue. So what did you do to try to improve their communication and increase their vocabulary and how to respect each other? And he's looking at me. He says, they fight. Well, that's because they can't communicate. So it goes back to the original question that I brought to you. So it's like trying to get them to understand and work with community. It's a two-way street. And each one of us has got a tool chest that we bring to this job. And, expand yourself so that you can address issues that you see while you're being a, quote, public servant, which is what we are, not police officer. We are public servants. So I don't want to go off on it, but anyway, that's some of the thinking that I have on how I deal with this stuff and how I try to train my students.
So you have so much knowledge and lived experience. So people are suggesting that if you haven't already, maybe you should write a book. So, us and the future generations, we will learn so much. And that will be useful in so many different spheres, not just policing and education, but overall as we fight systemic racism. And we also have a couple more questions. So let me get to that. Another famous quote from Martin Luther King is that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And so it means that, as South Asians, we also need to fight racism in any form and work on our own biases. So as a minority, as a person of color, or as a community of color, what advice or what would you say to us or the youth, especially the youth in our community? What can they do to be an ally to the Black community in Minnesota?
The first thing is being a role model and working with the young people. Young people don't see, they're so used to looking at these video whatever and these violent things on TV or whatever they look at. They need to hear that somebody really cares about them and that they are our future. And I need you, I always tell my students, stop and think, write down what are the things that you're really good at. Now write and think, what are the things you really aren't good at? And then look around to those that you know that are close to you or that you may run into and see how they're doing those things that you're not really good at. I mean, it's just how do we join together to build that? And like I say, the biggest thing is our young people, and I can tell you, because I see them every day. I live right here. I still live 1/2 block from the house I was born and raised in. So I'm in the inner city. And I'll always ask them, are you working? No, I don't have a job. Well, how come? And they said, well, I didn't get hired. Well, why? And tell me what it is that they said when you didn't get hired. What was it? And let's see, how can I pair you up with somebody? And I thank you for that question because it just brought something to my mind. One of the young people down at our church, he graduated from high school. I think it was middle school. And his mother said to me, because I always go down and I have this plaque that I give to my students when they complete my class. But then at church, I give them to the kids when they graduate out of Bible study or whatever. And it's words of wisdom. And she said, well, he's really good in accounting. And I said, you know what? Let me give you the name of the Black Accountants Association. And let them sit down with some Black accountants. I'll make a call ahead and say, hey, listen, I need you to work with this young guy. Let him know that there's a good jobs in this area. The Black Psychologist Organization for people to say, yeah, I want to go into psychology. Well, what do you know about it? I don't know anything, but I think I'd be interested in it. So it's those kinds of skills that you guys have and the connections you have that would be a resource to help young people, and especially the African-American young people. I need them to see visions of possibility. They don't have visions of possibility. I can tell you because I've listened to them and they don't see any visions of possibility. And I always try to encourage them to look for, tell me what you're interested in. And then I'm going to see if I can't find somebody that's in that area that can sit down and work with you or be connected with you or have coffee with you or pop or whatever it is, And then I go to those organizations and say, you know what? you guys should have Saturday sessions and dedicate that as your community service to do that with our young people, because we're losing them. And they're our future, and we really need to work on that. So maybe that might be a suggestion.
Yeah, those are all really very useful suggestions. And I like that concept of vision of possibility. And all kids need that, but more so minority kids who haven't seen role models like them in workplaces or in media and in leadership positions. So uh, we could go on talking forever, but we need to wrap up now. I would just like to reiterate what you said in the beginning. That is, we all need to stand up, speak up, and show up. And this was our attempt to try to show up and learn more about the African American history in Minnesota and to talk to you. We learned a lot. And as I said, we look forward to maybe a book from you so we can continue our learning journey. And before we end, I will hand over to IAM President, Mr. Kiran Bandi.
Hello, thank you. Thanks, Deborah. On behalf of India Association of Minnesota and our community, we thank you, Deborah, for being our guest today to share your journey, your experiences, and your thoughts for the future. It was truly inspiring reading and learning about you. And today, I want to say we feel very honored to have you here during the Black History Month and to have the opportunity to hear from you, one of the greatest Minnesota civil leaders. And you have taught us once again that we have a lot to learn from our history to make our future better for our next generations to come. And we hope to see a book from you soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It was an honor to share my time with you, and it's anything I can do to help. Like I say, I work with different groups and skills and things that you guys may have that I can use to help share with some of the young people. I welcome any assistance, and if I can ship some of them to you, I'll be glad to do that also.
Definitely.
Yeah. And just to let everybody know, if you are interested in learning more about our SAARI initiative, which is South Asians Against Racial Injustice, please visit our IAM website. And in the chat, we have put the website address. If anybody would like to volunteer or know more about our programs, do sign up for IAM newsletter. Again, you can go on our website and do that. So thank you. And the recording of this session will be available on YouTube and IAM's YouTube channel in maybe a couple of days. So if you want to take a look or if you want to share it with anybody else, you're welcome to do that. Thank you, everybody, and have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.